week 17 of the fantasy football season. If you made your championship, congratulations, and hopefully you can win this week here. There's nothing worse than falling short in a championship ball game since it's so hard to get there in the first place. But anyway, here's a few wide receivers I will bench this week here. In time of recording this video, none of these plays have been placed on the safety or protocol list. The first guy, Terry McLaurin of the Washington football team. So I said last week to bench McLaurin. I'm going to say it once again. Last week he didn't do much. I was surprised he was still in that ball game in garbage time versus the Dallas Cowboys after it was 56-7 at one point. So the last few weeks here for Scary Terry, week 14, he did nothing at Dallas. He left that game early with a concussion. He had 3 targets and did nothing. Week 15 at Philly in that one, 2 catches, 51 yards. And then week 16 at Dallas, a lot of garbage time catches where I was surprised, like I mentioned, he was still in the ball game. 3 catches, 40 yards. So right here, once again, this week versus Philly, that gives up the second least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. In my opinion, it's a no-brainer to bench Scary Terry McLaurin. I know he possibly could have a good game, but how could you trust him? He's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points in PPR week since week 11 at Carolina. So right now, with a bad offense, no fantasy numbers putting up, I definitely will bench him this week. The next wide receiver I will bench this week is Chase Claypool of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Claypool, just like Terry McLaurin, I said to bench him last week, and he pretty much didn't do anything. And this week here, tough matchup versus the Cleveland Browns that give up the 11th least amount of fantasy points to receivers on the season. And going back to week 8 at Cleveland, he didn't do much in that ball game. 4 catches, 45 yards, and 2 carries for 16 yards. So right here, it's all about Deontay Johnson, in my opinion, for this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. And obviously Najee Harris. But Big Ben this season hasn't been good. And in my opinion, he should retire. He just hasn't been getting the ball to Claypool like he did last season. So the last few weeks here for Claypool, week 14 at the Vikings, 8 catches, 93 yards in that one. Week 15 versus Tennessee, he did nothing. 1 catch, 12 yards, 7 rushing yards. And then week 16 versus Kansas City, 4 catches, 41 yards. So it's going to be tough sledding once again here for Claypool, in my opinion. Monday Night Football game, I know, versus Cleveland. But this ball game is going to be low scoring, in my opinion, between these two rivals. And I don't see Claypool doing more than maybe 10 or 12 fantasy points in PPR leagues, but I can't trust him in a big spot here. The next wide receiver is Van Jefferson of the Los Angeles Rams. So Van Jefferson, it's been a breakout second year for him for the Rams, no doubt about it. But the last few weeks here, his numbers have definitely dropped off as well. Week 14 at Arizona, 10 rush yards, 2 catches, 58 yards, a touchdown. Week 15 versus Seattle, 2 catches, 23 yards, 5 rush yards. And then last week, 1 catch for 6 yards in week 16 in Minnesota. So right here, he's pretty much a deep ball or nothing, it seems like to me here for Van Jefferson. And obviously with Odell Beckham in the mix there and Cooper Kupp, who's been the best wide receiver this season here, he's not going to have those consistent ball games. There's weeks here where he'll pop off for 18, 20 fantasy points. But right here, I know he's got a great matchup of paper of Baltimore that gives up the 5th most fantasy points to receivers on the season. But right here, I just don't see a big ball game out of Van Jefferson. And it's going to be risky, in my opinion, for fantasy owners to start him in a championship game where he's been inconsistent. The next wide receiver I would mention is A.J. Green of the Arizona Cardinals. So DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to be out once again, obviously, here with his injury. And A.J. Green's been the number 1 or 2 receiver over the last few weeks here. But he's another guy that's been hot and cold. Week 14 versus the Rams in that ball game, he had a great one. 7 catches, 102 yards. Week 15 in that one versus Detroit, 4 catches, 64 yards. And then last week versus the Colts, 1 catch, 33 yards. So right here, mediocre matchup at the Cowboys, who give up the 18th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So right here, A.J. Green, we know he's had a great career, but this season he's been hot and cold. And like I mentioned, with defenses obviously going to prepare for him more now with DeAndre Hopkins out of the lineup. He's going to be getting that coverage on him as A.J. Green, with Christian Kirk more the slot or number 2 guy. So with Diggs probably playing him this week here, it might be a tough matchup for Green. And he's a receiver I can't trust in a big spot because he's been inconsistent as well. In the 5th and final wide receiver I will bench this week, Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Mike Williams, he was on the COVID list here, and he should come off and play in this ball game. But even if he does, He's a wide receiver I don't like as well this week here. He's been too up and down this season as Williams. And he's got a tough matchup versus the Denver Broncos. In their last meeting in Week 12, he only had 4 catches, 39 yards. So the last few weeks here for Williams, Week 13 at Cincinnati, 5 catches, 110 yards. Week 14 versus the Giants, in that one, 6 catches, 61 yards. And then last week, the last game he played, Week 15 versus Kansas City, 3 catches, 49 yards. So with a tough matchup, with him probably not even being 100% as well coming off the COVID list. And his numbers dropping over the last few weeks here. Mike Williams is a wide receiver I would bench this week. So that's a few wide receivers I would bench here for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.